Usually, we picture nature as this unstoppable, relentless force.
Right, yeah. Like it's always bouncing back.
Exactly. We imagine forests just kind of clawing their way back after a huge wildfire. Or, those
Hmm.
aggressive weeds that stubbornly crack through solid urban concrete.
Oh, yeah. Dandelions pushing up through the sidewalk.
Yeah. We're conditioned to think of life as something that just always finds a way.
Hmm.
But when you look really closely at the extreme edges of the biological map, that illusion of invincibility just completely shatters.
It really does. You realize how delicate it all
You
is.
suddenly realize that some of our most fascinating ecosystems are hanging on by an absolute thread.
Hmm.
And so, for you listening today, our mission in this deep dive is to follow two very dedicated and actually quite young researchers on a highly specific botanical quest.
Very young, yeah.
We're going through this big stack of field notes, environmental data, and audio logs to explore, well, how ancient isolation shapes a species, what happens when nature's delicate balance is just totally disturbed, and this is the big one, whether we can ever actually fix a dying ecosystem once the damage is done.
Yeah, it is a phenomenal case study in biological fragility. And the subjects leading us into this are Kesser and Steen. There are these two 11-year-old naturalists from a nature and innovation class.
Which is just so cool. 11 years old.
I know, right? According to the field logs, on the absolute warmest day of the year, they jump on their bikes with this almost impossible objective. They are hunting for the rarest flower in their world, which is the purple broomrape or Orobanche purpurea.
And we really need to emphasize just how rare this is. It exists in only one single known location in all of Denmark, just one spot.
Just one. It's incredible.
And its closest neighboring population is located all the way across the Baltic Sea on the island of Öland in Sweden.
Which is a massive geographic gap.
Huge. But before we get into how a plant ends up stranded on two totally isolated landmasses, we have to talk about the physical reality of trying to find this thing.
Yeah.
Because the sources present this brilliant, almost detective-like discrepancy regarding what Kesser and Steen are even looking for.
Oh, the size debate, yes.
Yeah. So the Environmental Protection Agency states that the purple broomrape grows up to 45 centimeters tall.
Which is a decent-sized plant.
Right. But the boys flat out call that a fisherman's tale.
Yeah.
They're like, no way. They document that the absolute largest they have ever seen is maybe 18 to 20 centimeters. And our audio log suggests some variants are as minuscule as 5 centimeters.
I mean, 5 centimeters in a wild, overgrown coastal environment is practically invisible.
It's like hunting for a purple needle in a literal haystack. They're walking along this treacherous coastal cliff path, right?
Oh.
And they're completely surrounded by giant hogweed, towering thistles, dense wild roses.
Absolute botanical chaos.
Yeah. I read that and immediately wondered how anyone, let alone an 11-year-old kid, spots a 5-centimeter flower in that mess.
Well, the field notes actually attribute this to Kesser's trained perception.
Right, which is super interesting.
Yeah, it's a cognitive phenomenon that anyone who has deeply immersed themselves in a subject will totally recognize. It's identical to, say, learning a highly obscure word, and suddenly you see it in every book you read.
Oh, right, like the Baader-Meinhof and
Exactly. Your brain basically builds a neurological template. So once Kesser's visual cortex established the specific geometric pattern and, the exact color frequency of this tiny plant, his brain just learned how to filter out the massive visual noise of all that hogweed and the thistles.
So the flower shifted from being just background static to, like, a glowing beacon.
Yeah. That kind of hyper-specialized pattern recognition is totally essential for field botany. But what's fascinating here is to understand why the purple broomrape is geographically trapped in this one tiny location, we have to examine its survival strategy, because this plant does not participate in the standard biological economy at all. It is a holoparasite.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because that goes against literally everything we are taught about basic plant biology in grade school.
It really does.
A holoparasite completely lacks chlorophyll, right? So it physically cannot photosynthesize. It can't convert sunlight into food.
Right. It has entirely abandoned the foundational mechanism of plant life. So instead of generating its own energy, it relies entirely on a host plant. And for the purple broomrape, that host is almost exclusively the yarrow plant and occasionally wormwood. The broomrape survives by locating the yarrow and just bleeding its resources dry.
Hold on. So if it has no green leaves and doesn't function like a normal plant, How exactly does it physically steal from the yarrow? I mean, does it operate like some kind of botanical vampire?
That is actually a remarkably accurate way to picture it.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The broomrape utilizes these specialized root structures called hostoria, and these aren't your normal roots looking for water in the dirt.
Okay.
When the broomrape seed germinates, it sends out this root-like appendage that physically breaches the cellular walls of the yarrow's root system.
Oh, wow. It just breaks right in.
Exactly. It acts like a biological skeleton key. It bypasses the host's outer defenses and taps directly into the vascular tissue. So it connects to the xylem to siphon off water and vital minerals, and it taps into the phloem to steal the sugars that the yarrow, works so hard to synthesize from the sun.
So it is just the ultimate freeloader.
The ultimate, yes.
But, from an evolutionary standpoint, I have to challenge the logic of this strategy. I mean, it seems like a catastrophic gamble.
How so?
Well, think about it like a highly specialized piece of vintage technology. The broomrape is basically a device that only powers on if you possess one specific ancient charging cable, the yarrow plant. And you can only plug that specific cable into a very particular type of wall outlet, which, for this flower, is an alkaline, nutrient-poor, moist grassland. Like, how does any species survive long-term by being so rigidly inflexible?
Well, it survives because, over millennia, it became the absolute master of that one incredibly narrow ecological niche. I mean, the broader broomrape family contains over 2,000 species, and a lot of them are hemiparasites.
Meaning they still photosynthesize a little bit.
Exactly. They do a little of both while leeching off a host. But complete chlorophyll-free holoparasites has evolved independently multiple times. By totally abandoning the metabolic cost of producing leaves and chlorophyll, the purple broomrape can dedicate 100% of its stolen energy to reproduction.
Ah, so it's super efficient.
Hyper efficient. In that specific alkaline grassland, alongside that specific yarrow plant, it is a machine. But you are highlighting the fatal flaw in the design. Extreme specialization creates extreme vulnerability.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When an organism requires such precise, uninterrupted conditions to live, even the slightest environmental shift or just a moment of human clumsiness is utterly devastating.
Which brings us directly to the absolute tragedy outlined in the 2020 field data.
Oh man, this part is tough to read.
It really is. So Kesser and Steen are incredibly secretive about the precise coordinates of this cliffside meadow. They tell a story about this elderly local guy who pointed them toward the exact patch of flowers without them even asking. But the boys firmly refuse to reveal the location to you, the listener.
Good for them, honestly.
Yeah. They explicitly state they don't want 50,000 tourists trampling the fragile topsoil or, some ambitious landscape architect deciding the coastal view is the perfect place to lay a huge concrete foundation.
Their caution is completely justified, especially considering what happens when official management goes wrong.
Exactly. Because you would assume a plant this rare is fiercely protected by the government.
And technically it is.
Right. The meadow falls under Paragraph 3 of the Nature Protection Act, which makes it a completely restricted zone where nothing can be dug up or destroyed. Yet in 2020, the local municipality sent out a maintenance crew who fundamentally misunderstood their boundaries.
Such a disaster.
They literally drove a heavy-duty lawnmower right over the completely protected meadow, cutting everything down to the bare dirt.
And the timing of it was just catastrophic. They mowed it just days before the purple broomrapes were scheduled to flower.
Yeah, a single bureaucratic landscaping error completely wiped out the reproductive cycle of the rarest plant in the country for an entire year. 0 seeds were dropped, which led me to a massive question while I was reading through these logs.
What's that?
Well, if a single municipal lawnmower can eradicate an entire generation of these plants in a flat meadow, how is this species still alive at all? Like, where's the one place a lawnmower or a housing developer absolutely cannot reach?
And the boys figured this out through direct observation. The only place the plant successfully thrives today is right on the precarious edge of the steep coastal cliffs.
Right on the edge.
And the biological mechanics behind why they survive there reveal this beautiful irony. Because over the last century, human infrastructure, summer homes, paved roads, agricultural plantations, they systematically destroyed all the stable, safe inland habitats.
Right, we paved over everything safe.
Exactly. So the plant only survives on the sheer cliff edges because the ocean is violently and constantly eroding the hill.
Which is wild because coastal erosion is usually framed as a massive environmental disaster. We spend millions trying to stop it.
We do. But for the purple broomrape, that destruction is its absolute savior. The sea causes localized landslides, which continually shear away the cliff face, and this constant geological violence prevents the chalky soil from stabilizing.
Oh, so things can't settle in.
Right. If the ground were allowed to sit still, large, aggressive bushes and tall coastal grasses would take root. Those larger plants would physically shade out the tiny 5-centimeter broomrape and deny the yarrow the sunlight it needs to feed the parasite.
Wow.
The purple broomrape requires open, disturbed chalk. It is literally kept alive by the relentless destruction of the land it sits on.
It is thriving on the razor's edge, literally.
Literally.
But, solving the mystery of why it lives on the cliff only deepens the geographical mystery.
Whoa.
We know human development destroyed the habitats connecting different regions today. But how did this highly specialized, completely immobile plant end up isolated on a crumbling cliff in Denmark and on an island in Sweden, separated by the massive, deep waters of the Baltic Sea?
To map that out, we have to look far beyond modern history. We have to pull the lens back 12,000 years.
12,000, wow.
Yeah, right to the end of the last glacial period. When the massive ice sheets covering northern Europe began to retreat, the geography looked fundamentally different than it does today. The Baltic Sea did not exist.
Wait, there was no Baltic Sea.
None. Instead, that massive depression in the Earth's crust held a giant enclosed freshwater body known as the Enceladus Lake.
So the water levels were significantly lower, and the land masses of Denmark and Sweden were actually physically connected.
Connected by vast, sweeping land bridges. And crucially, those bridges were formed over a foundation of ancient, chalky seabed that dates all the way back to the Cretaceous period millions of years ago.
Oh, so the perfect soil conditions.
Exactly. As the climate slowly warmed, this massive ecological migration occurred. Vast networks of steppe plants migrated north from southern and eastern Europe, traveling across these dry, chalky plains.
So they were just walking right across, biologically speaking.
Right. The purple broomrape, along with its yarrow host, was part of that slow, sprawling migration. They didn't exist as these tiny, isolated pockets like they do now. They formed one massive, continuous biological community spreading across the land bridges.
But the post-glacial environment wasn't static. The ice kept melting.
Exactly. Billions of tons of glacial meltwater poured into the oceans, steadily raising global sea levels. And simultaneously, the Earth's crust, which was suddenly freed from the crushing weight of miles-thick ice, began shifting and sinking in complex ways.
A recipe for disaster for those land bridges.
Totally. Eventually, the rising salty ocean violently breached the land masses. It flooded the Enceladus Lake and carved out the deep straits separating Denmark and Sweden today. The land bridges just vanished underwater.
Which fundamentally changes how we view these flowers. I mean, they didn't miraculously blow across the ocean on a modern storm front. They're living biological relics.
That's a great way to put it.
They are literal time capsules, stranded on the exact same patches of dirt they have occupied since those ancient land bridges were swallowed by the sea millennia ago.
Their genetic lineage is shared because they are the fractured remnants of a single ancient pasture that was literally torn in half by geological forces.
That is just mind-blowing.
Huh.
But I do need to scrutinize the mechanics of their isolation for a second, because the botanical data in the notes states that broomrape seeds are microscopic.
Oh yeah, they're tiny.
They're described as feather-light dust, remarkably similar to orchid seeds. If they're light enough to be carried by the slightest breeze, why couldn't the wind just blow them across the strait to colonize a new, stable hill today? Like, why are they so permanently confined to their crumbling cliffs?
It's a really valid hypothesis, but the answer is buried in the meteorological data within the sources. You have to look at the intersection of wind patterns and soil chemistry.
Okay, let me pull up that section of the notes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the prevailing winds across the Danish coast predominantly blow toward the east, but the specific, chalky, alkaline hills that the broomrape mathematically requires for survival are situated geographically to the south.
Exactly.
So nature's conveyor belt is running entirely in the wrong direction.
Yep. The prevailing winds are essentially sweeping those microscopic dust-like seeds straight out over the open ocean or dumping them into acidic, sandy environments where they're useless to them.
Man, the environment is actively conspiring against this plant. The wind pushes them into the sea, the ocean is slowly eating the ground beneath them, and municipal mowers are indiscriminately chopping down the inland survivors. It is a bleak, heavily stacked deck.
Very bleak.
Which leads Kesser and Steen to propose this massive, deeply philosophical biological thought experiment.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, they ask, if the native Danish plant eventually goes extinct above ground, could we theoretically save the local population by bringing over its genetic relatives from Canada?
The concept of genetic rescue. It's highly debated in conservation biology. It seems intuitive, right? Introduce fresh genetic material to a struggling inbred population to boost its resilience. But in this specific scenario, from a mechanical biological standpoint, it is a catastrophic idea.
Why, though? If the Danish plants are fragile and failing, wouldn't they benefit from stronger DNA?
You have to analyze the environmental pressures that forged those Canadian genes over thousands of years. The Canadian variants evolved on the Canadian Shield, which is a massive geological expanse of ancient glacier-scraped bedrock.
Okay.
The conditions there are brutal. Nutrient poor, subject to extreme temperature fluctuations. The plants that survived that environment spent millennia evolving into aggressive, unyielding survivors just to pull basic sustenance from bare rock.
It makes sense. It's like taking a heavyweight boxer who has spent decades training for brutal bare-knuckle brawls and suddenly dropping them into the middle of an intricate, highly coordinated ballet performance.
That is the perfect analogy. If you take those rugged, hyper-aggressive Canadian genes and introduce them to the soft, relatively warm, shifting coastal sand of the Danish cliffs, you completely shatter the ballet. The conditions in Denmark are vastly more generous than the Canadian Shield.
So what exactly happens at the genetic level if they hybridize? Let's say we do physically cross-pollinate the fragile, locally adapted Danish variant with the rugged Canadian one.
In the first generation, you will witness what biologists call hybrid vigor.
Okay, meaning they get stronger.
Yeah, you will get a robust, fast-growing plant. But the true danger emerges in the subsequent generations through a process known as outbreeding depression.
Outbreeding depression, what does that do?
Well, when those hybrids reproduce, the genetic traits begin to sort and recombine. Because the environment demands survival, nature will actively select for dominance. The aggressive, fast-growing traits coded into the Canadian DNA will statistically overwhelm and outcompete the recessive, highly specialized traits of the Danish variant.
Wow, so the heavyweight boxer completely overtakes the stage. By trying to save the delicate, ancient Danish flower, you actively engineer its erasure.
Yes.
You don't rescue the 12,000-year-old genetic heritage, you completely overwrite it. The native plant just ceases to exist, replaced entirely by a tough Canadian weed thriving on a European vacation.
Precisely. You sacrifice the unique local adaptation for generic survival, which is why the botanical experts in the field notes assert that the only legitimate hope for this specific ecosystem, if the plant gets totally wiped out above ground by a mower or a landslide, relies entirely on a localized genetic time machine.
A genetic time machine hidden directly under our feet. The dormant seed bank.
Yes. Those microscopic seeds don't just land in the dirt and immediately sprout or die.
Right.
They can integrate into the soil profile and remain in a state of suspended animation for years, sometimes decades. And the mechanics of how they finally wake up is just a marvel of evolutionary chemistry.
Because they can't just sprout whenever they feel like it, right? If a holoparasite seed wakes up and there was no yarrow plant nearby to tap into, it just starves to death immediately.
Exactly.
So how does a dormant speck of dust know it's safe to emerge?
It relies on a chemical handshake.
A chemical handshake.
Yeah. The roots of the yarrow plant naturally exude complex plant hormones called strigolactones into the surrounding soil. They do this to communicate with beneficial fungi. Over evolutionary time, the broomrape seed developed the ability to intercept that exact chemical signal.
Oh, that is so sneaky.
It really is. The seed will sit in absolute darkness for decades until a yarrow root grows close enough to wash the seed in strigolactones. Only then does the chemical trigger fire, initiating germination.
Amazing.
And if that seed bank eventually sprouts naturally without human interference, it represents the pure, ancient, locally adapted Danish variant fighting its way back.
That chemical patience is astounding.
Yeah.
But patience is not exactly a hallmark of 11-year-old explorers.
Not at all.
So what does this all mean? Well, Kesser and Steen are so fired up by this geographical mystery that they formulate a wonderfully ambitious plan in the logs. They want to fill their pockets with these flowers, march right into Eske Willerslev's world-famous ancient DNA laboratory in Copenhagen, and sequence the DNA themselves to map the evolutionary divergence between the Canadian and Scandinavian plants.
I love that. It is an incredible visual. It just invokes the spirit of a 19th century naturalist returning from the wilderness with a satchel of unknown specimens, demanding answers from the academy.
Yeah, totally.
But the reality of modern genomic sequencing is vastly more complicated. I mean, Esko Willersle's facility orchestrates million-dollar operations, extracting trace prehistoric human genomes from permafrost and sequencing ancient environmental DNA.
Right, they aren't just putting a purple weed under a magnifying glass.
Exactly. Extracting and mapping evolutionary divergence requires rigorous sterilization protocols, polymerase chain reactions to amplify the degraded DNA, highly expensive chemical reagents, and months of running massive data sets through bioinformatics supercomputers.
Just a little bit of work.
Yeah, it's a grueling, highly specialized process. If the boys genuinely wanted to trace the phylogenetic tree and measure the exact genetic drift over the last 12,000 years, their specimens would be far better suited for the researchers at the Botanical Institute who actually specialize in establishing exactly those types of plant family trees.
Well, you still have to admire that relentless, pure curiosity.
Oh, absolutely.
And stepping back to view the entire scope of the material we've covered today, it really profoundly shifts your perspective. We have dedicated this entire deep dive to analyzing a purple weed that is at its absolute largest, maybe 20 centimeters high, but scientifically, it is so much more than a weed.
It is a 12,000-year-old survivor of the glacial retreat.
Yes. It is a highly sensitive living instrument measuring the biological health of its ecosystem. And it stands as an incredibly stark reminder of exactly how fragile our local biological heritage truly is when faced with human development.
It forces a necessary reevaluation of our surroundings. It demands that we recognize that the mundane landscapes we walk past every single day are built on deep, complex layers of ancient history that we remain, frankly, entirely oblivious to.
Which brings me to a brilliant piece of advice from young Steen in the field notes. He is speaking directly to you, the listener. Defending his secret meadow, he says, "You shouldn't come sneaking around here, but you should snoop around your own thicket and find exciting things."
That is the ultimate takeaway from this entire investigation. Because if a single practically invisible flower clinging to a crumbling Danish cliffside serves as a living monument to a lost 12,000-year-old land bridge, what ghosts of ancient forgotten landscapes are currently hiding in the weeds, cracking through the sidewalk in your own neighborhood?
Usually, we picture nature as this unstoppable, relentless force.
Right, yeah. Like it's always bouncing back.
Exactly. We imagine forests just kind of clawing their way back after a huge wildfire.